She had a name that no human throat could pronounce without injury. The closest approximation, as rendered by the Academy's translation matrix, came out as something between a whispered hiss and a struck bell. Velthara of the Serenthi Convergence, third caste navigator aspirant, currently ranked last in her cohort by every measurable metric except one. In the category of days without meaningful social interaction, she held the record by a margin so wide it had become its own kind of distinction. She was aware of this. She catalogued it the way she catalogued everything, precisely, without sentiment, with the particular brand of detachment that the Serenthi considered a mark of intellectual refinement, and that everyone else at the orbital conquered military academy considered deeply unsettling. She sat alone at meals. She ran simulations alone in the off hours. She had, in 7 months, exchanged exactly 43 sentences with beings outside of required coursework, and 31 of those had been navigation corrections during drills. The Academy itself was a rotating station in high orbit above Concord Prime, the administrative hub of the 11-species alliance that governed this quadrant of explored space. It was shaped like a double helix. 2 long spinal corridors wound around each other, connected by transverse bridges every 100 meters, the whole thing spinning slow enough that you got used to it in a week. Velthara had gotten used to it in 4 hours. The Serenthi had very good vestibular systems. What she had not gotten used to was the noise. 11 species produced 11 categories of sound, and at the orbital conquered military academy, they all produced them simultaneously at all hours. The Drethari clicked when they thought. The Coon sang in subsonic frequencies that Velthara couldn't hear but could feel in her secondary cartilage like a toothache. The Melvari shed bioluminescent spores when they were excited, which was often, and the spores smelled like burning copper. The humans, and there were 17 of them in the current cohort, were somehow the loudest species despite having only 1 set of vocal cords each, a feat Velthara found genuinely impressive in a way she would never say out loud. She was in the navigation lab when the transfer orders came through. She knew it was a transfer order before she read it because the administrative chime that preceded it had a particular harmonic, 2 short tones, 1 long that she'd memorized out of boredom 2 months ago. She read it without expression. A new cadet, human, late transfer from something called the Earth Defense Initiative's secondary training track. Name, Cadet Dara Osai, assigned to Navigation Cohort 7. Assigned bunk, the empty one across from Velthara's. She looked at the empty bunk in question. It had been empty for 4 months, since Cadet Foreign of the Coon had transferred to Weapons Track. Velthara had not minded the emptiness. She had found it clarifying. She filed the information away and returned to her trajectory calculations. Dara Os arrived on a Tuesday. This was not a meaningful distinction at the orbital conquered military academy, which operated on a 28-hour station cycle that bore no particular relationship to any planet's week. But Dara had been keeping Earth time in her head out of sheer stubbornness ever since she'd left the atmosphere. And so, for her it was Tuesday. And Tuesdays had always been her worst day, and this one was determined to maintain the tradition. She had missed the transport connection at Concord Hub by 4 minutes. She had made the next one but had been seated next to a Melvari who was deeply excited about something, an exam, she gathered, and had arrived at the Academy's intake dock smelling like a copper mine and carrying luggage that had been rerouted twice and now showed minor scorch damage from a docking clamp malfunction at the hub. She checked in. She was issued a uniform, a data slate, a translation earpiece already synced to Academy standard frequencies, and a bunk assignment. Navigation Cohort 7. She knew what that meant. Back home, back at the EDI track, she'd been top of her navigation cohort. Transfer to the Concord Academy had felt like a promotion. Transfer to Cohort 7, she'd done her research, felt like a reassignment notice worded politely. Still, she found the dormitory corridor, found room 7C, pressed her palm to the panel. The door slid open. The room was small and precisely organized. 2 bunks, 2 desks, 2 storage lockers. One side was inhabited, charts on the wall, a small collection of what looked like navigational instruments arranged with almost surgical care on the desk. A single photograph of what might have been a landscape pinned above the bunk. The other side was empty in the way of a room that has been empty for a while and has stopped apologizing for it. Sitting at the inhabited desk, not looking up, was the most motionless person Dara had ever seen. She was Serenthi. Dara recognized the species from the briefing files. Tall, very thin, with the pale bluish-gray skin that darkened at the joints and extremities. 4 fingers on each hand. Eyes that were large and slightly reflective, like a cat's eyes, currently directed at a navigation chart with the fixed focus of someone who had forgotten the concept of peripheral vision. "Hey," Dara said. The Serenthi did not move for a full 3 seconds. Then she looked up. Her expression was not unfriendly. It was not much of anything at all. "Cadet O," she said. Her galactic standard was precise, clean, slightly formal. "I was informed of your transfer." "Then you've got one up on me," Dara said, dropping her bag. "I wasn't informed about anything until 2 days ago. They gave me 48 hours to ship out from Earth." The Serenthi's head tilted, a small, precise motion. "That is a very short preparation window." "Yeah, well," Dara looked at the empty bunk, sat on the edge of it, tested the mattress. "Adequate. You been here long?" 7 months, 14 days. "Like it." A pause that was perhaps a half-second too long. "The curriculum is rigorous." Dara smiled at that. It was the kind of answer that was technically not a lie. She'd given a few of those herself. "Velthara, right? Your name, I'm guessing at the pronunciation, so tell me if I'm torturing it." Another small pause. "The approximation is acceptable." "Great, I'm Dara." "You don't have to call me Cadet Osa unless we're in class. I'll never remember to answer to it." She started unpacking. "What am I walking into with this cohort? They told me 7 is the slow track, but I did a navigation simulation on the transport, and my time was inside standard range, so I'm not sure what I'm doing here." Velthara watched her unpack. There was something slightly unusual about the way she moved, efficient, like she'd learned to work in small spaces. A lot of EDI cadets had that. The Earth Defense Initiative ran its training tracks on stations and ships rather than planetary academies, and it showed in the way their people carried themselves. Less wasted motion than most. "Cohort 7 is not stratified by ability," Velthara said. "It was stratified by social integration metrics." Dara stopped unpacking. "Sorry." The Concord Academy uses a placement algorithm that factors not only aptitude but projected compatibility with cohort members. Cadets assigned to 7 have, in general, demonstrated patterns that the algorithm classifies as poor integration probability. Dara stared at her for a moment. Then she laughed, a short, real sound that echoed off the walls. "So they put the weird ones together." Velthara considered this framing. It was reductive. It was also accurate. "In informal terms, yes. And you've been here 7 months, and you're still in 7. I have not sought reclassification. Because you don't want to be in a different cohort. Because the caliber of navigational instruction in 7 is the same as in any other cohort, and the social integration metrics that placed me here have not changed." Dara looked at her for a long moment. It wasn't an unfriendly look. It was the look of someone doing a fast calculation. Then she went back to unpacking. "Okay," she said. "What are the cadets in 7 like?" Velthara told her. She was precise about it. She outlined each of the 11 other members of Cohort 7 species, known behavioral patterns, areas of aptitude, areas of difficulty. She noted which ones tended to cluster together and why, which ones arrived early to navigation lab, which ones had specialty certifications that were unusual for their track. She had been observing them for 7 months, and had simply never shared the observations with anyone. Dara listened to all of it. She didn't interrupt. When Velthara finished, Dara said, "You know all that, but you haven't talked to most of them." "No." "Why not?" Velthara was quiet for a moment. Outside the room, something down the corridor, one of the Drethari she thought was clicking in rapid bursts. Amused, probably. "I observe," she said finally. "I catalog. I am less accomplished at the other parts." Dara nodded slowly. She'd hung a single item on her side of the wall, a laminated printout of a star chart that she'd clearly been navigating on. Velthara could see the pencil markings on it from across the room, handwritten, old habit probably from training in a lower-tech track. "I'm not going to pretend I'm great at the social stuff either," Dara said. "Where I came from, there were 9 of us in my whole cohort. We talked to each other because there was nobody else. That's different from this." She gestured vaguely at the wall, meaning the station, meaning all 11 species of it. "Yes," Velthara agreed, "this is different." They were quiet for a little while after that. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. That surprised Velthara slightly. The weeks that followed were not a friendship exactly. They were something more functional and perhaps more durable. Velthara had navigation charts for systems she'd already plotted, running calculations in the abstract for practice the way other cadets ran physical drills. Dara, it turned out, had a methodology for emergency calculation that she'd developed at the EDI, a shortcut that sacrificed a small percentage of precision for a significant gain in speed. She called it good enough to not die. Velthara found this philosophy philosophically unsatisfying and practically interesting. They argued about it twice a week, and on the 3rd week began combining their approaches in simulations, and their combined time was 17% better than either of their individual best. Their cohort instructor, a Drethari named KK Sath, noted this without comment and gave them harder simulations. The other cadets in Cohort 7 noticed them the way people notice things that happen quietly, gradually, without drama. Marin Voss, the human cadet who'd been at the academy longest, started timing her transit past their table at meals to see if they were working. Twice she stopped and asked about a calculation she'd been stuck on. Velthara answered without looking up from her chart. Dara answered by sketching a faster route on a napkin and leaving it on the table. The 3rd time, Marin sat down. After that, there were 3 of them at the table. This was more social interaction in 31 days than Velthara had had in the previous 7 months. She noted it. She did not find it unpleasant. She found it, if she was precise about it, slightly disorienting, like a familiar room with one piece of furniture moved. Dara, for her part, seemed to find the academy's noise and chaos more manageable after the 1st week. She learned which Melvari were excited constantly versus which ones were generally calm. She figured out which part of the station rotation made the Kun subsonic songs shift in frequency. She ate meals in the main hall and talked to people, not because she was naturally gregarious, but because she was naturally curious, and she decided, Velthara gathered this slowly, that the academy was a problem she intended to solve. "You do that with everything," Velthara said one evening. They were both in the navigation lab, which was empty except for them at this hour. Dara looked up from the simulation terminal. "Do what?" "Approach unfamiliar situations as optimization problems." Dara considered this. "Is that bad?" "It is not bad. It is functional. I do something similar." Velthara pulled up a trajectory she'd been working on. "I simply do not typically apply it to people." "Why not?" "I observe people. I do not generally attempt to solve them." "I'm not trying to solve anyone," Dara said. "I'm trying to understand the system I'm operating in. And people are part of the system. Everything is part of the system." She spun her seat around to face Velthara's terminal. "What are you running? That's not a standard simulation trajectory." "No. It is a route I calculated during free practice. A hypothetical insertion path into the contested buffer zone near Relay Station 9. Dara leaned forward. Her eyes tracked the holographic plot with the particular attention of someone who thinks in 3 dimensions. That's not in our curriculum. No. Why are you running it? Because it is interesting. She paused. And because relay stations operate as navigational anchor points. If a relay station were compromised, the effect on navigation in a 12-system radius would be significant. I wish to understand the geometry. Dara was quiet for a moment. Then, has there been any activity near Relay Station 9? Not that has been reported to cadet level. But at command level. Velthara looked at her. I do not have access to command-level intelligence briefings. No, Dara said slowly. But you do have the navigational sensor logs from the last 6 weeks because you pulled them for our deep space plotting exercise. She reached across and pulled up a secondary window on Velthara's terminal without asking permission, which was, Velthara was realizing, simply how Dara operated. Look at this. This signature here and here, these are in the sensor ghost range. They could be debris or they could be drive wake echoes. What's the heading? Velthara looked. She had seen those entries. She had noted them and filed them as noise. But as she looked at the heading now, cross-referenced against her own trajectory calculation, something in her secondary processing, what the Serenthi called the navigator's instinct, the pattern recognition that lived below conscious thought, produced a sharp, cold feeling in her chest cartilage. She cross-referenced it twice, then a third time. The heading was 22711 by Concord Standard Grid. Relay Station 9 was at 22709. That, she said, is a close approach vector. Very close, Dara agreed. The margin could be navigational drift. The margin could be sensor ghost artifacts. It could be. Dara pulled up a third window and began running a probability calculation. Not the Serenthi approach, the fast and dirty EDI method, good enough to not die, trading precision for speed. Or it could be something that's been watching the relay station for the past 6 weeks and staying just far enough out to stay in ghost range. Velthara ran the precise calculation in parallel. Both answers came back in the same second. Not drift, not artifact. Pattern. They went to their cohort instructor. This was not, for Velthara, a natural act. She had been trained by her caste, by her upbringing, by 7 months of practiced invisibility at the academy, to not bring things to the attention of authority figures unless the thing was already confirmed and documented, and so obvious that it was almost insulting to mention. What they had was a probability calculation, a pattern in noise data, and a navigational instinct. It felt presumptuous. Dara apparently had no such training. We need to show you something, she said to KK Sath within 40 minutes of their discovery, and the directness of it, the complete absence of apology or qualification, made Velthara briefly want to look at the floor. Then KK Sath looked at the data and began clicking very fast and called in the senior navigation officer on duty. And the senior navigation officer looked at the data and stopped looking bored. And Velthara decided that perhaps Dara's approach to authority figures was a study in practicality she'd been missing. The data went up the chain. It went up the chain fast. For the next 2 hours, Velthara and Dara were held in a briefing room while people considerably more senior than either of them moved around the station in ways that had a particular quality, contained urgency, like a current under still water. Velthara cataloged it. She had the feeling of something about to change and no precise calculation for what that meant. What it meant arrived at approximately 3:40 station time, when the alert tone sounded. Not a drill tone, a different harmonic, 3 short, 2 long, 1 short, that Velthara had memorized and hoped never to hear in a non-simulated context. She was on her feet before it finished. Dara was already moving. General quarters, all hands. They ran. The academy was a military installation. It had protocols. The protocols existed precisely for this. Cadets to defensive positions, experienced crew to stations, the whole machine engaging with the smooth efficiency of something drilled 10,000 times. And for approximately the first 40 seconds, it worked exactly as designed. Then the impact hit. It wasn't like the simulations. In the simulations, the impact was a number on a screen: damage report, sector, severity rating. In reality, it was a sound that Velthara felt in her bones before she heard it, a concussive shuddering that ran through the station's spine and translated itself into floor and wall and the ceramic of her teeth. Lights went amber. A second impact, different pitch, farther away, portside. The station's rotation changed, almost imperceptibly, a slight wobble in the gravity floor that anyone with a lesser vestibular system would have missed entirely. Velthara's secondary cartilage had never been more useful. "Portside docking spoke," she said, grabbing the wall panel for a status read. Second impact was the spoke junction. If they hit the primary relay coupling next. "We lose attitude control," Dara finished, reading the same panel over her shoulder. "All hands, we've got incoming. They're targeting the structural junctions. They're not trying to breach. They're trying to destabilize the station's rotation." "That is a very specific tactical objective," Velthara said. "Yeah." Dara's voice had gone quiet in a way that Velthara was starting to recognize. It happened when she was doing fast math and not liking the answer. "It's the objective of something that knows exactly what this station's weak points are. It's the objective of something that's been watching. 6 weeks of sensor ghosts. 6 weeks of close approach vectors at the edge of detection range. 6 weeks of something cataloging the Academy's structure, its rotation cycle, its junction geometry, with the patience of a predator that does not move until it is certain." The third impact hit the primary relay, coupling exactly where Velthara's calculation said it would. The lights went red. The floor's rotation stuttered, wobbled, then smoothed out at a slightly wrong angle. Not enough to create chaos, enough to create disorientation. The kind of disorientation that degrades response time, that makes people hesitate in corridors and grab walls, and lose the half-second that the margin of survival sometimes lives inside. They didn't hesitate. They were already running to the navigation center. The navigation center was chaos when they arrived, but it was a particular kind of chaos, organized chaos, the kind that exists when trained people are doing too many things at once and each of them knows which thing is theirs. Senior Navigator 8th, a Melvari whose spores were shedding in panicked copper clouds that made the air taste like blood, had 3 ensigns running damage assessment while she coordinated with external sensor arrays. The secondary command officer, a human named Reyes who Velthara recognized from corridor transit and had never spoken to, was running intercept projections on a holographic tactical display. None of them were happy to see 2 cadets. "Navigation lab is on lockdown," Reyes said without looking up. "Get back to your—" "We found the pattern in the sensor logs," Dara said. 6 weeks ago. We reported it 4 hours ago. We know the approach vector." That made him look up. Velthara was already at a secondary terminal, pulling up her trajectory calculations. The hypothetical insertion path she'd been running for practice, the route she'd found interesting, the geometry she'd wanted to understand. She overlaid it on the current tactical display without asking permission, which was, she was realizing, increasingly the correct response to crisis situations. The approach vector from the sensor ghost data places the attacking vessel at these coordinates before first contact, she said. Given their demonstrated targeting of structural junctions in sequence, their next logical target is the docking spoke array on the starboard side. If they damage all 4 coupling points in sequence, the station's rotation becomes uncontrollable. Reyes looked at the overlay, then at Senior Navigator 8th, then at the 2 cadets. "How confident are you?" he asked. 91.3%, Velthara said. "The remaining uncertainty is the possibility that they deviate from logical targeting sequence." "Humans in their situation would deviate," Dara said quietly. "We'd do something unexpected. But this, the 6 weeks of watching, the patience, the sequential targeting, this isn't how humans think. This is something that plans in straight lines." A moment of silence in which the station shuddered from a distant impact, farther away than the primary junctions, perhaps a test of secondary systems, as if something was methodically checking its map. "Straight lines," Reyes repeated. "Predictable, efficient, not adaptive." Dara met his eyes. "They've been watching us for 6 weeks, and they still don't know we spotted them 4 hours ago. They're operating on old information and they don't know it." Velthara watched Reyes do the calculation. She could see it in his face, the same motion she made internally, the rapid weighting of probability against cost. He looked at the tactical display. He looked at her trajectory overlay. He looked at Dara. "Navigation control," he said, loud enough for the room. "I need a defensive position and a movement recommendation for external response craft. I need it in 3 minutes." He looked back at the cadets. "You too, help." What followed was not heroic, in the way that Academy simulations implied heroism should look. There were no speeches. There was no single genius moment that unlocked the whole problem. There was Velthara at a terminal running trajectory calculations faster than she'd ever run them in practice, and Dara at the next terminal cross-checking her outputs with the fast and dirty EDI method, and the two of them arguing in quiet, rapid bursts about the margin of error while senior navigator Aeth listened and incorporated and modified and fed the results to Reyes, who fed them to the defense craft pilots. The defense craft went to the positions Velthara calculated. The attacker deviated slightly from the predicted sequence, not the creative deviation of adaptive thinking, but a minor variation that her probability calculation had placed in the 9.7% uncertainty. Dara caught it first. She flagged it in real time. The defense pilots adjusted. The starboard docking spokes were intact. The attacker, denied its next 4 targets in sequence, held position for 7 minutes. Velthara timed it precisely. It felt, in a way she could not fully articulate, like something recalculating. Something that had come with a plan and was discovering the plan was not working and had to decide what to do next. She had spent 7 months learning to navigate. She had learned it from charts and simulations and calculations. She had learned, in the past 31 days, something she could not have predicted she would learn. What it felt like to sit next to someone who thought differently from her, and to do something better together than either of them could do alone. The attacker made its decision. It broke off. Not a retreat, a withdrawal, precise and orderly, with the same patience that had characterized 6 weeks of watching. It transited to a calculated jump point and was gone before the response craft could intercept, leaving behind it a scatter of debris from the initial strike, a portside docking spoke that would need replacement, and a sensor ghost record that suddenly had a great deal more to say. The Academy was alive, damaged but alive. The navigation center was silent for a moment, then someone exhaled, then someone else did. And then there was the particular kind of noise that happens when people who have been very focused on a problem for a sustained period realize the immediate problem has passed. Not celebration exactly, but something adjacent to it. The sound of people still being present who might not have been. Velthara remained at her terminal. She ran the departure trajectory of the attacker 3 times, calculating backward from its jump point to confirm her model of its approach. All 3 calculations agreed. She saved them. She did not know exactly why. The sensation she associated with this, the pull toward documented precision, toward having the numbers even when no one had asked for them, was deeply familiar. Dara sat back in her chair next to her and let out a long, slow breath. "Good call on the starboard spokes," she said. The pattern was clear, Velthara said. Then, after a moment, your deviation catch was faster than I would have made it. The EDI method. Dara tapped her own temple, good enough to not die. On this occasion, Velthara said, with precision, it was good enough for that. She paused. This is the first time I have used this phrase in a non-ironic context. Dara looked at her. Her expression was the one Velthara had begun to associate with amusement, a particular arrangement of her features that Velthara had catalogued over the past month and now recognized without conscious effort. High praise, she said. It is accurate. Senior Navigator Aeth, whose copper smell had faded from panic to something more like relieved, appeared behind them. She was tall for a Melvari, and her bioluminescent patches, which had been cycling rapidly through distress frequencies during the attack, were now settling into a slow, steady blue, calm or something like it. She looked at the two cadets, and then at the calculations on their terminals. Cohort 7, she said, reading their identifiers. Yes, ma'am, Dara said. Integration metrics, Aeth said. She didn't make it a question. That is how we were classified, Velthara confirmed. The senior navigator made a sound that the translation matrix rendered as a dry laugh, though Velthara had a suspicion the original Melvari vocalization was something more complicated. The algorithm, she said, was measuring the wrong things. She looked at their terminals for another moment. Then she walked away, back toward her primary station, taking most of the room's attention with her. Velthara watched her go. The algorithm was measuring social integration frequency, she said, not collaborative output quality. Yeah, Dara's voice was quiet, thoughtful. It's a common mistake. People measure what's easy to count. Interaction frequency is easy to count. Right results are harder. She turned to look at Velthara. You've been here 7 months. 7 months and 23 days at this point. And in that whole time, you were running trajectory calculations on Relay Station 9 approaches in your free practice, because you found the geometry interesting. Yes. And those calculations were sitting in your terminal when we needed them. Yes. Dara was quiet for a moment, then she said simply, good. It was not an elaborate assessment. It did not have the structure of a compliment or the weight of a formal recognition. It was a simple word applied accurately to a situation. The Serenthi had a word for this that translated roughly as acknowledgement of correct existence. The recognition that a thing was where it was supposed to be, doing what it was supposed to do. Velthara had heard it used within her caste, and never outside it. She had not expected to feel it from a human cadet in a navigation center on a damaged space station, in the aftermath of an attack, translated through a word that contained approximately 1/3 of the original concept. She noted that she felt it anyway. The formal debrief took 4 hours. They were the only cadets in a room of officers twice their rank and experience, which was not a comfortable position, and which Velthara handled by providing every calculation she had run with meticulous documentation, and Dara handled by explaining, clearly and without apology, exactly what they had observed, what they had concluded, and why. Commander Asil, the Academy's senior command officer, was a Drethari of advanced years whose clicks had taken on the particular rapid-dense quality that Velthara had learned to associate with intense processing, thinking very hard, and not pleased about what they were concluding. The attacker withdrew rather than adapted, Asil said, not for the first time. This is your assessment. Yes, sir, Dara said. When its targeting sequence was disrupted, it held for 7 minutes and then withdrew on the same approach vector it came in on. That's not the behavior of something that problem solves in real time. That's the behavior of something executing a plan that failed. Implying that it went back to whoever gave it the plan. And that somebody is going to be very interested in what went wrong. A long silence in which Velthara could hear the Drethari clicking almost below audible range. A thinking frequency, she'd categorized it, common among senior officers in difficult meetings. Somebody, Asil said, already knows we spotted them, because we responded to positions they hadn't announced. Yes, sir, Velthara confirmed. From their tactical perspective, our response capability implies intelligence they did not know we had. We have revealed that we had 6 weeks of sensor data we did not act on until the final hours. They will analyze their own approach record and conclude that we found them but held the information. Why would we hold the information? Asil asked. They may not reach a correct conclusion, Velthara said. They plan in straight lines, as Cadet O described. The holding of intelligence for tactical advantage is not necessarily an obvious inference for a mind that does not operate that way. Reyes, who had been quiet in the corner of the room, made a sound that might have been a laugh. They might conclude we just didn't care, he said. That interpretation would be to our advantage, Velthara said. Asil looked at her, then at Dara, then, for a long moment, at the tactical display with its ghost signatures and its impact records and the cleanly logged departure vector of something that had come to do a specific thing and had failed. Integration Cohort 7, he said. Yes, sir, Dara said. Your placement records will be reviewed. He said it like he was filing it, not announcing it. More immediately, both of you will be attached to the sensor analysis team for the duration of the current threat assessment. Your navigational access will be expanded to include the full sensor archive. He clicked once, a short sound, decisive. Get some rest first. They were dismissed. The corridor was quieter now. The red alert had stepped down to amber, and the station was in that particular post-emergency state where everything worked but nothing quite felt normal yet. Velthara walked next to Dara without having decided to. It was simply the direction they were both going. Cohort reclassification, Dara said after a while. It appears likely. Does that bother you? Velthara thought about it. She thought about 7 months of navigation labs in the empty hours, of charts on the wall and calculations in the abstract, of 43 sentences exchanged in 7 months, and the particular clarifying quality of emptiness that she had convinced herself she preferred. She thought about the past 31 days. No, she said, I find I have revised my position. Dara glanced at her. On what? On whether the social integration metrics were measuring something without value. She paused. They were measuring the wrong thing, but something was there to measure. Dara was quiet for a few steps. Then, the algorithm was right that we were both bad at the standard kind of social integration. It was wrong that meant we should be separated from everyone else. We were not kept separate from each other. No, Dara's voice had a quality Velthara was still learning to read, dry, and also warm, which was a combination she had not expected from the same tone. It put us in a room together. Then it gave us a hard curriculum and a lot of quiet hours. And censored data with ghost signatures. And that, she glanced at Velthara again, funny how it worked out. Velthara thought, not funny, not luck. The Serenthi word was something closer to geometry, the sense of shapes intersecting at precisely the point where they create something that neither line contains alone. She had been calculating trajectories for months. She had not considered that trajectories could be social, that the vector of one person's way of thinking could intersect with another's at an angle that produced something new. She did not say any of this aloud, not because it wasn't true, but because she was still learning the rate at which true things could be said to Dara without overwhelming the channel. What she said was, I would be willing to continue the combined calculation approach in the expanded sensor analysis assignment. Of course, Dara said, obviously. They walked in silence for a while. Somewhere far down the corridor, a Drethari was clicking in the complex dense rhythm that meant deep thought. Somewhere else, A Melvari was shedding excited spores, copper smell faint with distance. 11 species, 40-odd cadets, a station still ringing from the impact of something that had watched them for weeks and misjudged what it was looking at. Velthara noted that the noise bothered her slightly less than usual. She had not calculated for that outcome. She found as she logged it that she did not mind. 3 weeks later, the sensor analysis team found what the attacker had left behind. It was in the debris from the initial strike, a fragment, barely the size of Velthara's palm, that had embedded itself in the station's outer hull with enough force to read as impact shrapnel, and not much else. The Academy's structural assessment team had catalogued it, labeled it debris, and moved on to more pressing repairs. Velthara found it because she had been running a complete inventory of every fragment above a certain mass threshold, not because she was looking for anything in particular, but because the geometry of the impact pattern had interested her, and because complete inventories satisfied something in her that partial data did not. Dara found what it meant because when Velthara brought it to her attention, she had looked at it for approximately 45 seconds and said, "That's not damage patterning, that's a regular interval spacing, that's manufacturing." It was a data chip, not a passive fragment. A chip, embedded in what looked like structural debris, surviving impact through a housing that was specifically designed to survive impact, now sitting in a debris sample box in a storage bay on a station that had no idea what it was holding. Velthara had it in her hand for approximately 3 seconds before her secondary cartilage did the cold, sharp thing again. "This was intentional," she said. "Yeah," Dara's voice had gone to the quiet fast-math place. "They didn't come here to destroy the station. They came here to leave this. The attack was cover for the delivery." Velthara turned the chip over. Its housing was a material she didn't recognize, darker than standard alloy, slightly warm to the touch, with a faint iridescent quality that moved when the light hit it. Not Concord manufacture, not any manufacturer she recognized. If this contains data, then whatever's on it was worth a ship, an attack, and the exposure of a 6-week surveillance operation. Dara was already reaching for her comm. "We need to get this to a seal." "Yes." Velthara didn't move immediately. She was looking at the chip, at the iridescent surface, the warmth of it in her palm, the manufacturing precision of a housing designed to survive exactly the impact it had experienced. "They planned this for a long time," she said. "The watching, the approach, the cover attack, all of it to deliver this to this specific station." "We were the destination," Dara said. "We were the destination," Velthara confirmed. They looked at each other across the small space between them, in a storage bay on a damaged station at the edge of the Concord's administrative territory, holding something very patient and very deliberate had crossed a considerable distance to plant in their hands. "Hey," Dara said. "Yes. Nice catch on the geometry." Velthara looked at her. She thought about saying, "I always notice geometry." She thought about saying, "The probability of this having been found by accident is very low." She thought about the 43 sentences in 7 months and the last 31 days, and the navigation lab with 2 terminals and a combined calculation time 17% better than either alone. What she said was, "It is a useful thing to notice." Dara smiled at that, the particular arrangement of expression that Velthara had catalogued and could now read without effort. Warm, dry, real. "Come on," she said. "Let's go figure out what we're holding." Velthara walked with her. Down the corridor, past the repaired docking spoke junction, past the navigation center where the lights were back to normal, and the rotation was steady, through the part of the station that smelled like copper spores and Drethari click patterns, and 17 different human voices talking over each other in the mess hall, the whole living noise of a station that had been hit and was still going. The chip was warm in her palm. Whatever it contained, message, map, data, something with no name in any language she knew, had waited 6 weeks and an act of deliberate violence to arrive here. She intended to be the one to understand it. That, she thought, was worth being present for. And the academy turned in the void and they walked, and the noise was all around them. And Velthara, for the first time in 7 months and 23 days, did not catalog it as a problem to be managed. She cataloged it simply as home.